Hello, it's good to be back with you today. We're using the book of John and looking at questions that Jesus asked to his disciples and to the religious leaders and to the people that he had encountered really in daily life. We're in chapter 14, so if you want to find your Bible, we'll come back to that in just a moment and we'll read a passage together. Do you remember back a number of years ago when Polaroid cameras were so popular? I wanted one so bad. All my friends had one. It was fun. They could take pictures at parties and instantly get a picture. I thought that would be great to have. You remember how they worked? You took a picture and then it shot out the bottom of the camera. You took the picture in your hand and you waited, you counted to 10, and at the end of that you pulled off the layer of the filter of the cover, whatever it was that was there. And then as it was exposed to the light, things began to change. It was black when you first tore off that filter, but then it began to turn gray. And then you could see a little bit of the image that was there. And then after a few more minutes, it became very clear, very sharp, and you could see whatever it was that you had photographed. It was a great camera. Now, if you remember that, let me also ask you this. Do you remember your first picture of God? Well, the other day I was going through some things in here in my office, and I came up, and there are all kinds of pictures in here, and it's memorable. You know, I can go back and see the pictures there, and I'm reminded about sitting in church, looking in those pictures during the sermon and not listening to the sermon. But anyway, one of the pictures that I had early on of God was one of those pictures that was painted probably by an Italian Renaissance artist. It was the one where God was sitting on the throne. He was an old man. He had a long white beard and a white robe. He had lots of muscles. He was very strong. And at times he even looked a little scary. He was there to punish me if I had done something wrong, or if I did something right, then he liked me. It was a little bit later after that I learned that we could pray to God and ask. I was told you could ask him whatever you wanted and he would give it to you. And if he didn't give it to you, that meant that your motives were wrong or there was some sin in your life. But that God was some kind of year-round Santa Claus. All you have to do is ask and he'll give it to you. I also at times saw God maybe as the boss, or maybe as the police officer who was waiting to catch me if I had done something wrong. In the end, I saw God probably like a lot of other people did. He was white, male, he was Baptist, he spoke with a Southern accent, and he was an American. At times, I would take those phrases that people would say, like, God is my co-pilot. And I thought of him in that sense. Or I would hear people say he's the man upstairs. And so I thought about him in those terms too. J.B. Phillips wrote a book a number of years ago called Your God is Too Small. It was a profound book that made a big difference in my life because it helped me to see how I envisioned God and what God was really like. I'm going to get settled down here. The disciples also, let me get my Bible. The disciples also found that they had a picture of God. And the longer they walked with Jesus, the more that picture was transformed. The more they walked in the light, exposed to the light of who Jesus was, they began to understand more and more of who he was. One day, Jesus called them aside. Now, they had been there when Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead, and they saw how the crowd became angry after that happened, and were not angry, but ugly. They had also been there when he brought him back to life, and that they heard the rumors that people wanted to kill him. They were trying to get rid of him. So Jesus was trying to prepare his disciples. And so he took them into he was going to take them into the upper room. You remember the things that happened there. He washed their feet. He broke the bread. He shared the cup with them. He told them about a betrayal that was going to happen and a denial that would happen. And so he's called them together to address their concerns. And that's where we pick up in chapter 14 of John in verse 1. Jesus said, "Don't let your hearts be troubled. trust in God, trust also in me. My Father's house has plenty of rooms. If that were not so, I would have told you. But I'm going to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place, I will come back and take you to be with me, so that where you are, I am also. You know the way and the place where I am going. Well, then Thomas said, Lord, how do we know the way? So he responds to him, and I'm going to jump down to verse 8. No, let's just read that. Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. If you really knew me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do not know him and have seen him. You do know him and have seen him. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. And Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip? Even after I have been among you for such a long time, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. And so that's the question that we look at today. Philip, don't you know me, even after you have been with me for such a long time? Well, Jesus was getting ready to leave. It was going to be soon, and so he wanted to prepare his disciples. And so he spoke these wonderful words. And then, he said this question, Philip, don't you know me? And in verse 8, it says, Lord, Philip said, show us the Father. Just if you'll show us the Father, then we'll be satisfied. We weren't there, but you can almost hear the frustration in Jesus' voice, wondering, has anything at all sunk in all of this time I have been with you? I've been here so long, and now you're saying, and Philip, you still don't know me? You don't know who I am? But then he goes on and says these powerful words. If you have seen me, then you have seen the Father. In other words, whenever you see Jesus, you are looking into the very face of God. Philip had wanted some proof of that. He wanted a sign that would somehow he could hold on to when it was dark and he was afraid and Jesus was gone and no longer with them. He's not a lot different from us, is he? We all like signs and we all like certainties. We don't want to be by ourselves. We'd like to have some proof that the presence of God is there. We place a lot of stock in evidence and things that we can see and hold on to. There are two large murals in the lobby of the Metropolitan Opera House in New York City. They measure about 30 feet by 36 feet. They're huge. And it's kind of a wonder to see and imagine how the painter really painted such a huge picture. In the corner of the picture, he wrote his name, Marc Chagall. He is a Jewish artist and just did a magnificent, marvelous job. But his signature was there for all to see what he had done. I think part of what Philip's complaint is to God is that, God, you've not left any autographs anywhere. This picture that we have of you is hazy and indistinct. It's sort of like that Polaroid camera. It's still in that gray area. It hasn't become sharp yet. If you just give us a miracle, if you just give us some proof and answer this question once and for all about who you are, that would mean so much. But Jesus says to Philip, faith doesn't come in these dazzling miracles, Philip. Faith comes in human flesh, and that human flesh is mine. God didn't sign his paintings with a flourish like Marc Chagall. Instead, he left a person. John says it like this, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And so Jesus' life and ministry shows us a clear picture of who God is. And so Jesus' question, Philip, do you know me? He uses that word know. He's used that in a lot of different places and a lot of different times. And as we have learned, it is that very personal kind of knowing, a very intimate kind of knowing. Philip, do you not know me? Don't you not have this relationship with me after all of this time that I have been with you? The disciples looked to heaven. They wanted a sign of God. But when they didn't find any answers, then they looked around for some kind of signature of his presence. Well, John says it's the incarnation. It is Jesus coming to earth that would change their direction and their understanding. He who has seen me has now seen the Father. Now, if that's true, and if God is in Jesus Christ, that means when they look at Jesus, they are really looking into the face of God. Now, it would take years for them to understand this, the depths of these words. In fact, they would look back and they would see how a new picture of God was beginning to form in their mind. Now, later, Philip, I'm sure, remembered that day that when he left everything, when Jesus called him, and he said, yes, I'm going to leave it all behind. And he looked back on the kindness and the acceptance that Jesus had shown to him and had brought into his life. And he probably reasoned somewhere in there that God must be like this. God must be like Jesus. Then that picture became a little bit clearer. You remember whenever Jesus was going to feed the 5,000 and he came to Philip and asked him if he, about food, providing food to feed these, and he said, I don't have anything. And he took that small lunch and he fed that multitude and had some things left over. And I wonder if the picture of who God was became a little bit clearer that day for Philip. And I wonder if he wondered in his own mind, could God take the bits and pieces of my life and do something huge with it, really make a difference in the lives of people? I believe the picture got a little bit clearer when they were in the upper room and Jesus knelt down and washed the disciples' feet. And he began to understand that God was that suffering servant who really did come to serve his own people. Then there were larger memories, like the cross and the terrible pain that Jesus endured. And then there was the resurrection and all of the glory and the hope and the victory that came from that experience. He said, if you see Jesus, then you see God. Does that mean that God suffers and struggles along with us whenever we do? Yes, it does. Does it mean that even when we throw the worst at him, he can come back and with the power to invade the world with a great sense of love and integrity in his presence? Yes, it does. Philip will later minister in a variety of places, so the legend says, all throughout Asia, Lydia, Parthia, and Gaul. All of those places are scattered across Asia. Philip never imagined that he would be there. Years before, whenever Jesus had said to him on the side of the Sea of Galilee, come and see, well, Philip had done that very thing. And out of that experience, he really did see more than he thought he would ever experience in his life. I think John included this story in his gospel because he's writing to a church a little bit later on that is struggling. A lot of the eyewitnesses for Jesus have died. They've been killed. Many of those faithful are gone. And so with those eyewitnesses being gone, John wants to write a record so that that early church can remember who Jesus was. They needed some reassurance that God was present with them, even in these very hard and trying times, and that they needed to remain faithful to him. John turned them toward Philip, I think, in this story, a story of a man who over the years had put his old pictures aside, and he did so for something better. And in the process, he began to see God, Jesus, a lot clearer through those experiences. Do you remember how you saw God when you were a child? I hope that the way you saw him then is different than the way you see him now. I hope your understanding of God through Jesus Christ has grown to include that picture of Jesus and his love and compassion, and a picture of a God who struggles with us when we struggle, suffers when we suffer, and celebrates when we celebrate. You've been with me all this time, Jesus said, and you don't know me? How would you respond to that? Think about it this week, and I'll see you again next week.